Princess Silara sat on the high balcony of the Etheri Palace, staring at the twin moons of her homeworld, Etheris Prime. The silver light reflected on her pale blue skin, making her appear almost ghostly against the dark sky. Below, the city was alive with celebrations, the sounds of music, laughter, and the echoes of warriors demonstrating their combat skills in the grand arena. Tonight was the annual Unity Festival, a gathering of all noble houses. It was a time for the strongest to prove their worth, for warriors to display their battle prowess, and for the future leaders of the Dominion to gain recognition. But for Silara, it was just another reminder that she did not belong. She was the firstborn of the supreme ruler, heir to the throne by birthright. Yet, in the eyes of her people, she was unworthy. The reason? She had been born with a rare condition that weakened her muscles, making her incapable of participating in the traditional combat rituals of the Etheri. Strength was everything in their society, and those who lacked it were seen as burdens. A ruler who could not fight was no ruler at all. Her younger brother, Prince Phaler, had already begun to take her place in the eyes of the nobles. He was strong, skilled in battle, and respected by the council. Many whispered that he should be named heir instead of her. Silara clenched her fists. She had spent her life proving her intelligence, mastering diplomacy, and learning strategy. She understood war better than most of the generals who mocked her. But none of that mattered to the Dominion. They only saw her weakness. A soft knock at her chamber door broke her thoughts. It was her handmaiden, Ilari. "Princess, the council has gathered. The human delegation has arrived." Silara sighed. Humans, a new species in the galactic community, unpredictable and untested. The Dominion viewed them with suspicion, believing them to be reckless and undisciplined. Some even called them weak, as they had no rigid warrior traditions like the Etheri. Yet, Silara found them fascinating. They were resourceful, adaptive, and most importantly, they did not judge worth based on physical strength alone. She rose from her seat, smoothing her flowing ceremonial robes. "Let's not keep them waiting." The summit hall. The great council chamber was filled with nobles from across the Dominion, their elegant yet battle-worn armor gleaming under the golden lights. At the center of the grand hall stood a group of humans, dressed in their formal uniforms, standing with confidence despite the heavy stares upon them. Silara immediately noticed him, Captain Daniel Reeve. He stood tall, his dark eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. Unlike the other Etheri nobles, who carried themselves with rigid discipline, he had an ease to his stance, relaxed yet alert, as if ready for anything. The supreme ruler, Silara's father, raised his hand for silence. "Welcome, representatives of humanity," he said in a deep, commanding voice. "Tonight, we discuss the future of our relations. But first, a test of worth." Silara's heart sank. A test, of course. As was custom, any species wishing to be recognized as an ally had to prove their strength. One of the nobles stepped forward, smirking. "As a sign of goodwill, we offer a ceremonial bonding to strengthen our ties." He turned to the crowd. "Who among the noble houses will accept such an honor?" Silence. Then a chuckle rippled through the hall. The nobles looked toward Silara. "Why not the princess?" one said mockingly. "Perhaps the humans will take responsibility for her." Laughter spread across the room. Silara felt her face burn, but she remained expressionless. She was used to this. Captain Reeve's eyes flickered to her. His expression was unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, he stepped forward. The room fell silent as he spoke. "Will you mate with me?" Gasps echoed across the chamber. The noble's laughter died instantly. Silara's breath caught. He had said it so casually, without hesitation or mockery. It was not an insult, not a joke. The supreme ruler narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand what you ask, human?" Reeve met his gaze without fear. "I do." Murmurs erupted. No outsider had ever challenged Etheri customs so directly. Silara, still frozen in place, realized something. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and had seen more than her weakness. She took a step forward. Her voice was steady, clear. "I accept." The hall erupted into chaos. The great hall of the Etheri Palace was in chaos. Nobles whispered in shock, warriors exchanged stunned glances, and the supreme ruler himself sat in silence, his sharp gaze locked onto his daughter. Silara had just accepted Captain Daniel Reeves' proposal. A human had asked to bond with the forgotten princess. And she had said yes. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest, but she did not let it show. Instead, she kept her back straight, her expression calm, and her gaze steady. Even as the council erupted into arguments, even as her younger brother, Prince Valor, clenched his fists in anger, she did not waver. This was her choice, the supreme ruler's judgment. The supreme ruler finally stood, raising his hand. The hall fell into silence. His expression was unreadable. "Captain Reeve," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "do you understand the consequences of your words?" Reeve nodded. "I do." The ruler's sharp eyes studied him. "You are an outsider, a human. The Etheri do not take bonding lightly. It is not a simple agreement. It is a union of honor and responsibility." "I understand that," Reeve said calmly, "and I stand by my words." Murmurs spread through the nobles. Some were outraged. Others were merely curious. A human, choosing to bond with her. Prince Valor stepped forward, his voice filled with anger. "This is an insult to our people," he shouted. "A warrior must be strong, and my sister is." "Enough." Silara's voice was firm, cutting through the noise like a blade. Valor turned to her, his expression filled with disbelief. "I am still a daughter of the Dominion," she said, "and I will not be spoken about as if I am not standing right here." Valor's jaw tightened, but he did not argue further. The supreme ruler studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Very well." The hall gasped again. "The bonding will proceed." Behind closed doors. After the meeting ended, Silara found herself alone with Reeve in one of the palace chambers. The room was vast, decorated with banners of her family's lineage. The air was thick with unspoken words. She turned to him. "Do you even understand what you just did?" Reeve shrugged. "I made an offer. You accepted." Silara narrowed her eyes. "That was not just an offer. In our culture, a bonding proposal is a life commitment. It is not something to be taken lightly." "I don't take it lightly," he said, his voice steady. She studied him. "Then why?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "Because I saw something no one else in that room did." Silara's breath caught. "You're more than what they think you are," he continued. "You've been ignored, pushed aside. But I can tell, you're strong in ways they refuse to see." She had spent her life trying to prove that to her people. And now, in one single night, a human had seen it without her saying a word. She didn't know how to respond. The outrage of an empire. By the next morning, the news had spread across the Dominion. The noble houses were in uproar. Some demanded that the bonding be stopped immediately. Others believed it was a political disaster, an insult to Etheri traditions. Silara was summoned to a council meeting, where she faced a room full of angry elders. "You are throwing away the legacy of our ancestors," one of them shouted. "A ruler must be respected," another argued. "And no one will respect a princess who bonds with a fragile outsider." Silara's patience finally snapped. "Respect," she repeated, her voice sharp. "You mean the same respect that has ignored me my entire life." Silence. She took a deep breath and continued. "For years, I have studied strategy, diplomacy, and war. I have dedicated my life to the Dominion. And yet, I have been overlooked, because I do not fit the narrow image of what a leader should be." Her gaze swept across the room. "You all speak of strength, but strength is not just in the body. It is in the mind. It is in the will. and I will not be dismissed any longer." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Then Reeve spoke, "And if anyone still doubts her strength, then they can challenge me." The hall went dead silent. It was an open challenge, and in Aetheri culture, to refuse a challenge was an act of weakness, a new kind of strength. The supreme ruler watched the exchange with careful eyes. Finally, he leaned forward. "Very well," he said. "Captain Reeve will prove himself in a trial of skill and tactics." Silara turned to Reeve in alarm. "You don't have to." He gave her a small smile. "I do, because this is about more than just us now." Silara knew he was right. This was no longer just a political alliance. This was something far bigger. And for the first time, she had an ally who truly stood beside her. The news spread like wildfire. A human had challenged Aetheri warriors to a trial of skill, and the supreme ruler had accepted. The Dominion was divided. Some nobles saw it as an insult. Others were simply curious. Could a human, a species without warrior traditions, stand against the might of the Aetheri? Silara stood in the palace gardens, watching the sky darken with the twin moons of Aetheris Prime. She had spent years trying to prove her worth to her people, and yet it was Reeve who had taken a stand for her in a way no one else ever had. "You don't have to do this," she said as he approached. Reeve gave a small smirk. "I seem to remember you telling me the same thing yesterday." She sighed. "You don't understand. The Aetheri trials are not just about fighting. They are about proving your worth. You will be tested in ways you've never experienced before." "Then tell me what I need to know." Silara hesitated. "They will not fight fair. They will look for any weakness." "Good," he said, "because humans don't fight fair either." She stared at him, unsure whether to be concerned or impressed. The trial begins. The grand arena of Aetheris Prime was one of the most sacred places in the Dominion. It was where warriors proved their strength, where leaders were chosen, and where legends were made. Now, it was the stage for the first ever human trial. The stands were filled with nobles, warriors, and spectators from across the Dominion. The supreme ruler sat on the highest throne, his gaze unreadable. Silara stood beside him, her hands clenched as she watched Reeve step into the arena. His opponent was Commander Valtherin, one of the Dominion's finest warriors. 7 feet tall, clad in ceremonial armor, Valtherin exuded power and confidence. He was known for his brutal tactics, a warrior who had never been defeated in combat. The challenge was simple, a test of skill. 3 rounds. The first to win 2 would claim victory. Valtherin sneered. "You should not be here, human." Reeve only smiled. "Let's find out." Round 1. Strength. The first round was a test of raw power. It was a traditional Aetheri trial, pushing against a force plate to measure strength. Valtherin stepped forward first. He placed his hands on the metal plate, muscles tensing. The display lit up. 500 units. A strong score. The crowd cheered. Reeve exhaled. He wasn't weak, but compared to an Aetheri warrior, he was at a disadvantage. He placed his hands on the plate and pushed. The display flashed. 320 units. The crowd erupted in laughter. Silara closed her eyes. She had told him this was a bad idea. Valtherin smirked. "Is that all, human?" Reeve just dusted off his hands. "Yeah, well, I never liked lifting weights anyway." Round 2. Intelligence. The second round was a battle of strategy. Both warriors were given a holographic battlefield with simulated armies. The goal? To outmaneuver the opponent in a mock war scenario. Valtherin played aggressively. He used brute force, leading his armies in direct assaults. It was the Aetheri way. Attack, conquer, dominate. Reeve, however, played differently. He used feints, traps, and unpredictable movements. He sacrificed weak units to draw Valtherin into ambushes. As the minutes passed, the crowd fell silent. The final result appeared on the display. Winner, Captain Reeve. Silara smiled for the first time that day. Reeve turned to Valtherin. Guess we humans do know a thing or two about war. Valtherin growled. Round 3. The final challenge. The final round was combat. No weapons, no armor, only skill. The moment the fight started, Valtherin attacked like a storm. He was faster, stronger, more experienced. Reeve barely dodged the first strike. The second sent him stumbling back. Silara's heart pounded. He was outmatched. But then she noticed something. Reeve was learning. He wasn't fighting like an Aetheri. He was adapting. Instead of meeting Valtherin's attacks head-on, he dodged, weaved, and let the larger warrior's own strength work against him. The crowd murmured. This was not the way Aetheri fought. Then it happened. Valtherin lunged for a final strike. Too fast, too strong. Reeve stepped aside at the last second. Valtherin's own momentum sent him crashing into the ground. The arena fell silent. Reeve dusted off his hands. Well, that was fun. The Supreme Ruler stood. The trial has concluded. A long pause. Captain Reeve is victorious. The crowd exploded in shock. Silara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Reeve turned to her, giving a small grin. Told you I had this. For the first time in her life, Silara was not ignored. And for the first time in Aetheri history, a human had changed everything. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in the grand arena. Never before had a human won an Aetheri trial. And yet, before their very eyes, Captain Daniel Reeve had defeated one of their finest warriors. Silara had never seen anything like it. Valtherin lay on the ground, his breathing heavy, his pride shattered. When he finally rose, his piercing gaze met Reeve's. The Aetheri warrior clenched his fists, but instead of anger, there was something else in his expression, respect. He stepped forward and placed his fist over his chest, the traditional salute of the Dominion. You have proven yourself, human, Valtherin said, his voice steady. I do not like you, but I cannot deny your skill. Reeve smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. The Supreme Ruler stood from his throne, raising a hand for silence. The trial has been completed. The bonding proposal between my daughter and Captain Reeve will proceed. The arena erupted in more chaos, but this time, it was not laughter. It was debate. The council's disapproval. The noble council met immediately after the trial. Silara sat in the chamber, her hands resting on the long marble table. Around her, the elders spoke in heated voices. This is madness. One of them shouted, how can a human, an outsider, be bonded to the royal bloodline? The trial was fair. Silara replied, her voice calm but firm. You all saw it. The people will not accept it, another elder said. They already have, Reeve added, leaning against the doorway. Did you hear the cheers out there? They weren't calling for Valtherin. Silence filled the room. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. The Supreme Ruler watched everything, his sharp eyes studying both his daughter and the human beside her. Finally, he spoke. The people honor strength, he said. And Captain Reeve has shown strength, not only in battle, but in his mind. Some elders still looked dissatisfied, but they could not challenge the Supreme Ruler's decision. Silara glanced at Reeve. She had been alone in these meetings for years, but now she was not standing alone. The weight of a bonding. Later that evening, Silara found herself alone in the royal gardens, staring at the glowing flowers that shimmered under the twin moons. She heard footsteps behind her. You okay? Reeve's voice was softer than usual. She turned to him, studying his face. You do realize what you've gotten yourself into, don't you? He chuckled. Oh yeah, pretty sure half your planet wants me gone. Silara shook her head. It's not just that. A bonding is for life. It is not just a ceremony. It is a commitment to rule together, to stand together through everything. Reeve's expression turned serious. And do you regret accepting it? She hesitated. No, but I never thought anyone would choose me. His gaze softened. I didn't do this because I had to. I did it because I saw something in you. Silara felt her heart tighten at his words. For so long, she had been ignored, looked down upon, but not by him. She took a deep breath. Tomorrow, we begin the official bonding rituals. After that, there is no turning back. Reeve smirked. Then I guess we better make history. She gave a small smile. We already have. A kingdom divided. News of the Supreme Ruler's decision spread across Etheris Prime. Some saw it as a new future, a chance for change, for growth, for the Dominion to be more than just warriors. Others saw it as a betrayal. Whispers of rebellion began to spread through the noble houses, and deep in the shadows of the palace, someone was already planning to stop the bonding at any cost. The palace corridors were quiet, but not at peace. The announcement of Silara's bonding with Captain Reeve had divided the Dominion. Some saw Reeve as a warrior who had earned his place, while others saw him as a threat, an outsider who should never have been allowed to stand beside a princess of the Aetheri. And in the darkness of the palace halls, plans were already in motion. The assassin's message. Silara stood on the palace balcony, watching the city below. The lights of Etheris Prime stretched into the distance, glowing like a sea of stars. Yet, despite the beauty, she felt uneasy. The bonding ceremony was set to begin in 2 days. 2 days before everything changed. Reeve stepped beside her, his arms crossed. You look worried. She exhaled. I would be a fool not to be. There are many who do not accept this bonding. Reeve smirked. I noticed. One noble spat on the ground when I walked past earlier. Pretty sure that wasn't a greeting. Silara shook her head. I'm serious. Reeve. The Aetheri do not simply protest with words. When they disagree, they act. As if to prove her point, a sudden explosion erupted in the courtyard below. Guards shouted in alarm as fire and smoke filled the air. Silara's heart pounded. An attack. Here, in the palace. Then, a guard ran up the staircase, his face pale. Princess, a message for you. He handed her a small metal tablet. The screen flickered to life, revealing a short text. The throne will not be tainted. The bonding must not happen. Turn back, or suffer the consequences. Reeve read over her shoulder and sighed. Well, that's not very welcoming. Silara's grip tightened around the tablet. This is only the beginning. A dangerous decision. The Supreme Ruler called for an emergency meeting. Silara, Reeve, and the highest-ranking nobles gathered in the war chamber. The air was heavy with tension. The rebels have made their message clear, one noble said. They will not allow this bonding to happen. Another noble, older and wiser, frowned. The question is not whether they oppose it. The question is how far they are willing to go. Reeve leaned back in his chair. Seems pretty far, considering they just tried to blow something up. Silara shot him a look, but he wasn't wrong. The Supreme Ruler's expression was unreadable. We cannot let fear dictate our decisions. The bonding will proceed as planned. But, Supreme Ruler, one noble started, but the ruler raised a hand. The Dominion has always respected strength. If these rebels wish to challenge my rule, then let them come forward openly. But we will not cower in the face of threats. Silara felt pride in her father's words, but she also knew the truth. This was not over. And the rebels would not wait for the ceremony to strike again. A trap in the shadows. That night, Silara could not sleep. The warning played over and over in her mind. She knew her people. If the rebels wanted to stop the bonding, they would not wait for the ceremony. They would strike soon. She left her chambers and made her way through the quiet halls of the palace. The guards were more alert than usual, watching for any sign of danger. But Silara did not feel safer. If anything, the air felt heavier, as if someone was watching. As she turned a corner, she heard a faint sound. A whisper. A shift in the shadows. She reacted instantly, stepping back just as a blade flashed through the air. The dagger missed her by inches, embedding itself into the wall. A hooded figure lunged at her, but Silara was ready. Years of training kicked in, and she dodged, sweeping her leg under the attacker. The figure stumbled but recovered quickly. Silara was about to strike again when suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the hall. The attacker froze, a smoking hole in their shoulder. Reeve stood behind them, his pistol raised. "Well," he said, lowering the gun, "looks like I was right about people trying to kill us." The wounded assassin turned to run, but palace guards were already rushing in. Within seconds, they had the attacker pinned to the ground. Silara pulled off the hood, revealing one of the palace guards. Betrayal. Her chest tightened. "Who sent you?" The rebel only glared at her, refusing to speak. The supreme ruler arrived moments later, his expression dark. He studied the scene, then turned to the captured assassin. "Take him to the interrogation chamber." As the guards dragged the rebel away, Silara turned to Reeve. "You saved my life." He smirked. "Yeah, well, can't let my future bonding partner get stabbed before the ceremony, can I?" Despite everything, she found herself smiling. For the first time, she wasn't facing these battles alone. But in the depths of the palace, the true enemy was still watching, waiting. And they had no intention of letting the bonding ceremony happen, no matter what it took. The palace was no longer safe. After the attack, the supreme ruler increased security. Guards patrolled every hall, and scanners were installed at every entrance. No one could move freely without being watched. But Silara knew one truth: the real enemy was already inside. She sat in the royal war room, her fingers tapping against the table as she studied a map of the palace. Beside her, Reeve leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His usual smirk was gone. "So we've got traitors inside the palace," he said. "Great, just what we needed." Silara glanced at him. "We knew this would happen. The bonding has divided the Dominion." "Yeah, but I was hoping the worst we'd get was angry glares, not assassins in the hallways." She sighed. "The attack was only the beginning. They will not stop until the bonding ceremony is destroyed." Reeve exhaled and shook his head. "Then we have to hit them first." She frowned. "You want to attack?" "No, I want to find them. Whoever is leading this rebellion. They're not hiding in some cave. They're here, in the palace, acting like one of your nobles or generals. And we need to figure out who it is before they make their next move." Silara studied him carefully. He was right. The rebels were not outsiders. They were among them. And if they did nothing, the rebels would strike again. A secret meeting. That night, Silara and Reeve moved through the palace disguised as guards. The corridors were quiet, but their every step was dangerous. They needed answers, and they knew exactly where to find them. The captured assassin was being held in the underground cells. No noble would ever dare set foot in such a place, but Silara was no ordinary noble. When they reached the cells, the guards hesitated. "Princess," the supreme ruler ordered. "This is my command," Silara interrupted. "Open the door." The guards obeyed. Inside, the prisoner sat against the wall, his wound bandaged, but his expression cold. Silara stepped forward. "Tell me who sent you." The prisoner smiled. "I have nothing to say to a princess who betrays her own people." Reeve stepped beside her. "Okay, let's skip the threats. You're in a cell, bleeding, and you know the bonding will still happen. So why don't you just save yourself some trouble and tell us who's behind this?" The prisoner laughed. "You really think the Dominion will let this bonding happen? You think my life is worth anything compared to the legacy of our people? We are warriors. We do not bow to outsiders." Silara clenched her fists. "Then you are blind. The Dominion must evolve. You think strength only comes from tradition. Strength comes from change." The prisoner's eyes darkened. "You are not the first to think this way, Princess, And you will not be the last to fall because of it. Reeve frowned. That sounded a little too confident. Silara's heart pounded. Something was wrong. Before she could react, the lights in the cell flickered. The prisoner smirked. A second later, a blast shook the palace. The attack begins. The ground trembled. Alarms blared through the halls. Silara grabbed the bars of the cell to keep from falling. Reeve pulled out his communicator. Report. What just happened? A guard's voice came through, panicked. Explosion in the West Wing. We're under attack. Silara turned to the prisoner, realization hitting her like a strike to the chest. This was their plan all along. The assassination attempt was a distraction. The real attack was happening now. She grabbed Reeve's arm. We need to get to my father. He nodded. Let's move. They ran through the halls, the sound of battle growing louder. The rebels were inside the palace. The throne room battle. By the time they reached the throne room, chaos had already begun. Rebel warriors clashed with palace guards. The supreme ruler stood at the top of the stairs, his royal guards forming a protective wall around him. But it was clear the rebels had been waiting for this moment. They were well armed, well trained, and completely focused on one goal: stopping the bonding. Reeve pulled out his weapon. I think this is the part where we jump in. Silara drew her own blade. Try to keep up. Together, they charge. Silara fought like she had been trained, striking with precision and speed. She dodged a warrior's attack and countered with a powerful strike, sending her opponent crashing to the floor. Reeve, despite not being an Aetheri, fought just as fiercely. He used his human agility to his advantage, dodging attacks and taking down rebels with fast, unpredictable moves. But the rebels kept coming. Then, a new figure appeared. A noble stepped forward, his armor gleaming under the palace lights. His cold eyes locked onto Silara. Princess, he said, his voice full of contempt. You should have listened to the warnings. Silara's blood ran cold. Lord Sereth, a high-ranking noble, a man who had always opposed her rule, and now, the leader of the rebellion. Sereth raised his blade. You have shamed our people long enough. This ends tonight. Silara tightened her grip on her sword. No, Sereth. This is only the beginning. They lunged at each other, blades clashing in a deadly dance. The battle for the Dominion had begun. The throne room burned with battle. The golden pillars were scared by energy blasts, and the floor was covered in fallen warriors. But neither side had won yet. Silara stood face to face with Lord Sereth, the rebel leader. His cold eyes glowed with determination, his blade raised, ready to strike. You were born a warrior, princess, Sereth said, but you chose to betray your own blood. Silara's grip tightened on her sword. You call it betrayal. I call it evolution. Sereth lunged, and their blades clashed with a metallic ring. Sparks flew as they struck, blocked, and countered. Across the room, Reeve fought alongside the palace guards. His movements were sharp and fast, using his human instincts to dodge and strike back. Despite being outnumbered, he fought like he had nothing to lose. But the rebels were relentless. They pushed forward, forcing the guards back. The supreme ruler's protectors fought bravely, but they were losing ground. Reeve caught sight of Silara, still locked in battle with Sereth. She couldn't fight alone. He rushed forward, dodging an enemy's blade at the last second. He grabbed a fallen blaster and aimed it at Sereth. Hey, shiny armor. Reeve called. Why don't you pick on someone who isn't half your size? Sereth's eyes flickered to Reeve. He scoffed. A human dares challenge me. Yeah, well. Reeve shrugged. I've been told I have bad ideas. Sereth turned, swinging his blade at Reeve. But Reeve was faster. He dodged and fired a precise shot, hitting Sereth's shoulder. The noble stumbled back, pain flashing in his eyes. Silara didn't waste the opportunity. With a sharp, decisive strike, she knocked Sereth's blade from his hands. He fell to one knee, clutching his wound. The battle paused. The rebels, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated. The supreme ruler stepped forward, his voice strong. "Surrender now, and I will show mercy. Continue to fight, and you will lose everything." For a moment, silence filled the throne room. Then, one by one, the rebels dropped their weapons. The battle was over. A new beginning. Silera stood before the palace, watching as the last of the rebels were escorted away. Sereth had been taken into custody, his rebellion crushed. She felt the weight of everything settle on her shoulders. The fight was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. Reeve walked up beside her, arms crossed. "So, does this mean we won?" She smiled. "We did more than win, Reeve. We changed history." He smirked. "Yeah, well, I guess that's what happens when humans show up to the party." She turned to him, her gaze softer now. "You could have left. You didn't have to fight for me." He chuckled. "I think we both know I was never going to walk away." She exhaled, then looked toward the horizon. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the city. Tomorrow, the bonding ceremony would take place. Tomorrow, a new era for the Dominion would begin. And this time, they would face it together.